I'm always grateful to read posts from others explaining the rules of particular places. A library where you mustn't interrupt the girl in the reflective jacket who reads collective ESVN poems to herself until midnight. A campsite where you must politely offer some of your food to the faceless people who visit your campfire. An old house where you must not look out the window if you hear the sound of bells. And particular places have particular rules. It might be because they're ancient, special, haunted, cursed, or just particularly beautiful places for other things to make their homes. Sometimes you can learn a little from reading others' lists. Others' hard-won knowledge of what is or isn't safe. But spirits are petty and varied. One will tear out your tongue if you speak to it. Another will kill you for rudeness if you don't. It takes an expert on the area to know. I don't live anywhere quite like that. I live in the old part of Edinburgh. There's nothing cursed or ancient about my flat. It's actually probably one of the least supernatural places in the city. It's safe. The cities often don't have guardians in quite the same way that rural places have. Forests, lakes, valleys, and even big ranches. They'll have owners or rangers or guardians, often passed down through generations or trained and picked carefully by mentors. I like talking to people from those wild places, the guardians, rangers, and owners of forests and lakes and valleys. I respect the heck out of their attitude, their reverence for the places that they watch over. I don't have anything that special. I stumbled into this. I'll tell you that story if you're patient. And while I'd rather die than be impolite to something really ancient and fey, sometimes in cities what you're actually dealing with is a vomit nymph or a minor cocaine spirit that's occasionally hard to take seriously. But I'm lucky. I tend not to need specific rules. Of course, there are places like the bridge that you must not walk under if your voice doesn't echo, and Arthur's Seat has its fair share of terrifying things. But for the most part, I'm only really concerned by the universal rules, the ones that pretty much apply anywhere, whether it be an ancient haunted cathedral or the most mundane cafe. If you're hurrying home between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., don't look behind you. Make sure your bed has your head further from the door than your feet, and ensure at least one side, preferably two, is against a wall. If you're walking past a room and see a person out of the corner of your eye, but when you check again it's just an outfit on a coat hanger, don't freak out. But always make sure to check again. And break at least one solemn promise before about mid-February of each year. Close your closet door firmly before sleeping. It's okay if it cracks open so long as it's too narrow for a finger. Stay under your blanket when you sleep. Having a leg out of the blanket is okay, but don't position your feet where they could be seen from under your bed. Windows can slide upwards or open outwards, but must never, ever open inwards. If you feel the intense sensation that something is watching you from the window, ideally close the curtains. You can look from your bed or couch, but never go over to the window and look down, and never ever press your face against the glass. Only certain people are safe to sleep in complete darkness. You'll know instinctively if you're one of the ones who needs to keep a light on or a window open. Don't sleep with someone until you've had at least 3 dates. They can't maintain a good consistent mimic for more than 2 evenings, so after 3 you're safe. On midwinter morning, whichever date you personally celebrate is your winter festival, ensure there's at least one sock in your home that has no pair. There's more, but I don't need to tell you them. See, the universal rules have become a part of us now. Either they're in our biology, things that we've known from birth without needing to be taught them, or they're aspects of culture that get most people to obey them without knowing why they're doing it. Some of them, I think, aren't actually universal. For instance, I think the rule that you must offer tea, specifically tea to strangers in your home, is only on this island. The creatures that demand it only really live here. I think some of the rules are culturally dependent, because of course an arbitrary calendar day isn't actually how most non-humans count New Year. It's about the rhythms of your life and the points in those rhythms where certain things might pay attention to you. Edinburgh doesn't really have many rules that you wouldn't get elsewhere, not rules that apply to all of it. You get some hecking specific rules if you're working in certain parts of the castle at 3 a.m., but really it's just a matter of common sense. It's a very old city, an important city. Scotland is an old, wild country and it remembers all sorts of things. It's a beautiful city with so many layers to it and so many ghosts. There are things here that you wouldn't imagine, but you don't have to tap on anything 7 times. And if you order a kebab from the man with a tattoo of a swarm of wasps after taking the last train from Glasgow, look, you didn't know how bad a decision that was, but you well knew that it was a bad idea. At this point, you're probably wondering who I am. I certainly don't have any official position. I don't own any land here. I'm not descended from anyone and I'm not trained as police or anything. Actually, no human picked me. It seemed random. The night after I moved here almost 16 years ago, I had the most fantastically vivid dream. I was dancing with the most beautiful woman that I've ever seen. She had flame red hair and wore a tattered copper dress. She danced with a sword in each hand, but I was unafraid. She moved with such clarity of intent, and she inspired me so much with her grace that I was able to fluidly move around her in perfect timing, and the blades never touched me. I had never danced in my life, and I can't dance when I'm awake, but she moved me. That's all I can explain. I was awoken by a knocking on my door. It was the same woman. I admit after our dance, I'm feeling a little famished, she said. I invited her in for eggs and bacon. In hindsight, that was stupid. Most magic runs on rules and rituals and the laws of thresholds. Home sanctity and hospitality are some of the oldest of all. There's plenty of things out there which only need an invite in your home to destroy you. But I'm glad that I did. She didn't touch the eggs and bacon, but she told me that it was a kind and respectful offer. The first thing that she told me was about Waverly. Well, no, actually the first thing she told me was that I needed to get a new coffee machine because my old one was going to break in about 5 more coffees. The second thing that she told me was that, before getting on a train to Stirling, I should check if there's a stop at Silvery. There is no Silvery on the line to Stirling, at least not unless I'm at the station. I've checked with friends who've confirmed this. It's only there when I am, as far as I know. It's safe for me to get off at Silvery. I have an invitation. It is not safe for you and you shouldn't try. I saw a teenager try it once and another man who was probably just counting stops to his normal one and didn't look up from his phone as he got off. That's another one of those stories that you can ask me for. Anyway, my day job is in an office and I do things with spreadsheets. It's just, in my spare time, I'm one of the people who helps with the rules. There's actually a fair few of us, with as many people and other beings as there are in a big city, but I don't know the others. And I'm writing all of this because apparently some people don't know all the rules. They just didn't get it somehow. Their parents didn't teach them or their instincts are all wrong. So I figured that I should write something that explains them. Some of them are obvious. You sure know why your closet door must never be wide enough cracked open for a long gray finger to curl out from inside and wrap itself slowly around the door. If you don't, please just imagine your reaction were you to see that. Congrats, now you know. Some of them you think you learned better about, but you didn't. Adults know it's safe to put your feet in the cracks between the paving stones, but that doesn't mean that children are wrong about it being dangerous. The edgelings only take small and tender victims, but some are counterintuitive. George, a local nurse and one of the other part-time guardians, called me up yesterday. That was the call that prompted this post. He told me about an awfully weird occurrence at the hospital. Apparently, an elderly patient reported waking up at around 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, hearing nothing but perfect silence. She looked at the door and in walked a sort of, I hesitate to call it a man. Apparently it had arms that were far too long and dragged on the floor, only a gaping hole where its eyes should be, and a torso that wrapped around in spirals like a knotted rope. The man stopped in the doorway, breathing heavily, and then reached out with one hand. It seemed like his feet couldn't pass the doorway apparently, but his hands could. Walking his fingers across the floor, then eventually taking a deep breath and supporting the full weight of that awfully long arm, he groped along the beds of the ward until he made it to hers. When he touched her feet, his hands weren't cold. They were warm, slimy, a little suctiony. Something told her to remain perfectly still, not to react and not to give any sign of life. The moist, heavy fingers explored her toes a little, lifted her heel and then dropped her foot. The long-armed creature sighed heavily. "No tasty eyes here," it whined. "Need tasty eyes." It took a deep breath, coughed up some slime and whimpered like a child begging for ice cream. "Delicious eyes." And then it left. Apparently the doctors think that the woman's crazy. There is absolutely no sign of the creature on the hospital CCTV. No slime where it supposedly coughed. But George is the nurse that helps old people get cleaned up, and he says that her feet were, well, sticky. In a way that turned his stomach, and George's stomach is strong enough to clean pus out of the guy who decided to stick his thing up the open surgical wounds in his own arm, and then laugh about it over a pint. George mentioned that he's glad his patient was sleeping with her head and her eyes away from the door, and her feet towards it. He made sure that it's hospital policy to ask all patients to sleep that way. I thought that it might be valuable to let you all know. I'll be back with more stories of the work that people like George and I do. Longer ones too, since I won't have to give all this context. And perhaps some more explanations of the rules that you already know. When I wrote yesterday about never sleeping with your head towards the door, I admit that I was honestly a little overwhelmed by all the comments and positive responses. I'm glad that I've helped so many people stay informed and stay safe. Though I hope I haven't scared you off of Edinburgh. It's a beautiful city. A lot of you mentioned the rules about spaces behind you. Don't look in mirrors in dark rooms. Don't look over your shoulders at what might be following you. Don't rush or act afraid when you sense something behind you, and so on. So I thought that I would write something about those rules to help explain and to help deter the few of you who think you'll go around glaring defiantly behind you as if you can prove me wrong. You know that you can't do that. You know how strong that instinct is, that you shouldn't look, and you know that nobody told you. You got it from somewhere deep within you. It's convenient because this also is the story of how I met George. I'm just going to be honest with you, out late at night, mildly tipsy, buying a deep fried at Mars bar. For those of you who don't live in regions where this exquisite cuisine is possible, you're just going to have to believe me that it's good. It just is. Moving on. I left with my battered prize and was about to sink my teeth in when I saw him. A young man, dark-haired, coat turned up against the cold. I approved of the coat and his sensible woven scarf. I saw him throw a look over his shoulder as he passed. I didn't approve of that so much. And then I saw that his shadow became ever so slightly larger. Crap. I knew about the thing behind you even back then. I wouldn't have been allowed to do this job without at least some preparation. But I had never seen it hunt in real time before. Never been the bystander as it got started. If I called to the young man, would that make him look again? If I followed him, that definitely wouldn't help. God, I didn't know him, but I couldn't just let this happen. I made a snap decision and I broke into a sprint. I would circle around the hill and meet him on the other end of the street. It had been raining and my feet slipped a little over the cobblestones, the cold air rushing into my ears for an instant headache. I needed to be in front of this guy. I saw him again as he hurried around a corner and threw another anxious glance behind him. "You've got to stop doing that," I called out. The dude looked at me like I was crazy, glanced at me, glanced behind him and then back at me. "Are you talking to me?" A pipe was dripping water into the gutter at the corner of the square. Each droplet stood out to me in the darkness. Tiny pearls glided by reflected lamplight. I don't know what George was hearing, but I could tell the rhythm of that drip wasn't entirely natural. It just seemed off. "Yeah, and I need you to stop looking behind you." After a moment's thought, I added, "Because there's nothing behind you." The shadow shrank just a little bit. I hadn't practiced this, I had never done this before, and my facial expression must have given it away, and the young man noticed. His shadow grew, and this time it wasn't a subtle difference. It wasn't one of those imperceptible differences that you can only pick up on if you're me. It looked like somebody was shining a torch right under his feet to cast a shadow that big. The shadow loomed up on the crescent behind George, broken up by the shapes of Edinburgh's typical tall windows and cut off just at the neck by the dark tiles of the roofs. "You're looking behind me," he accused, but he didn't turn around. That was good, I approved of that. Sensible scarf boy might have forgotten the rules, but at least he could see it once I reminded him. I made a series of rapid plans in my head, all discarded. It was imperative that he calm down. It was absolutely imperative that he didn't look behind him. I needed him not to see that shadow at all costs. I would have been more than happy to blind him, but I wasn't entirely sure how to achieve that from a distance with the 2 pens, keys, and a phone in my pockets, and I sure as heck wasn't chancing a wrestling match. Trying somehow to look as though I was both non-threatening and a total professional, I skipped the last few steps to the dark-haired man, grabbed his arm, and started down the street. I was almost surprised when he complied, but then I looked over at him. Now that I was closer, I could see the tears in his eyes. "You know what's behind me," the man accused in a whisper. "I do," I admitted, "and it feeds on fear, so I need you to stop thinking about that. I want you to think about the fact that I'm taking you to a safe place. I want you to think about deep-fried Mars bars." I realized as I said it that I still had the thing in my hands, and I offered him a bite. He accepted, trembling. "I would like you to focus on telling me your name and what you would like to make for breakfast tomorrow." We were walking briskly, and I had a grip on his forearm that was a little too hard. I shifted it to his shoulder. The thing behind him was substantial enough now that it was casting its own shadow. I prayed he didn't notice. I couldn't make out much from the shadow, but it looked like it had a pretty long knife. "George," was all that he offered in response. I suppose that is fair given how terrified he was. "Okay, George, we're going to. Screw it, my place is too far. We're just going to pop into the library, that's a couple of streets over." There were 3 sets of footsteps on the cobblestones. I hurried mine along, wanting to make sure that George didn't notice. I kept up a patter of completely meaningless talk. The thing behind George's knife got longer. The relief when I saw the light spilling from the front door of my local library absolutely drenched me. I kept a steady, brisk pace up to the front door, shoved George inside, and shut the door behind us. It was only a glass door. It wouldn't hold. I drew George further into the library, found a chair that I could position in the corner, and made sure that he had his back to 2 walls before we relaxed. Both of us were breathing hard in the sudden quiet. "That was one of the other that you just handled for me, wasn't it?" I froze. George wasn't supposed to be asking about that. Why would he know about that? "It's okay," he reassured me. "I'm a guardian too, just I kind of inherited it, and I don't know what I'm doing yet." And so I told him the rules. Not to ever look behind him if he's on a dark street like that. If it's targeted you once, you're more vulnerable. I told him how it progresses. At first, it's your shadow. If you don't believe in it, it's not strong enough to do much or to hurt you. But when you glance behind you and perhaps you see a leaf stirring in the wind or an oddly shaped shadow, it lends just a little credibility to the idea that maybe there could be, or could have been, something there. And that little bit of belief is enough to give it power. Still, not enough power to hurt you. Still, not enough to take physical form even. But enough perhaps to change the way a water pipe drips or nudge the air to blow a little differently. You think that you hear something behind you, so you look over your shoulder again. That little bit of extra belief still won't give it physical form, but it can nudge things. It could make the air feel warmer on your neck. It could make the street seem quiet. Too quiet. It could lengthen your shadow so that if you turn around and glance at it, something might seem off. You believe something is off, that something is dangerous. Perhaps you believe a little bit that there might be something behind you. It gets stronger. I told him all of this before realizing that I had made a terrible mistake. Have you ever read or told a story that scared you so hard that your eyes watered from the sheer mental strain of it all? Like your fear was leaking in liquid form from the nearest outlet. I had made sure that George had his back to a wall. I hadn't done the same for myself, and my tears were blurring my vision. I wiped them away and noticed George was a little more scared than I had expected from simply hearing about a monster, at least from a guardian. "Is there something behind me?" I asked in the most measured, calm voice that I could possibly summon. "Absolutely not." A book fell on my head. "There is definitely nothing behind you." I could feel the breath on my neck just as I had mentioned. I wish that I hadn't used that example. I hate breath on my neck. "Please, look at me." I think in hindsight, George's nurse training kicked in. I looked at him, trying to actually stop scanning the empty library aisle for anything to help, and I looked at him, right into his eyes. He has chocolate brown eyes. "There is absolutely nothing behind you. There never has been. You are safe. You are completely safe." I stood up. "There's one last thing you can try in an emergency. It works best if you trust somebody with your life. But George was all that I had." I walked towards him, took his hands, and pulled him up. I almost slipped his hands out of mine. They were so sweaty. "Would you prove that there's nothing behind me for me?" I asked, knowing how crappy it was for me to ask. Could we stand back to back? The ordinary nurse who never wanted any of this looked over my shoulder. He visibly flinched. I felt the sensation of somebody behind me slipping a knife around, poised in front of my throat. George closed his eyes and rapidly took 2 steps past me, directly into whatever was behind me, but there was no sound. I felt his back pressed against mine, trembling. There was no knife against my throat. I reached behind him and held his hands, and we stood like that for a while, breathing in tune, hearts thudding like rabbits, knowing the only things behind us were small or harmless enough for the other to face them for a stranger. Anyway, that's how I met George. Of course, I couldn't stop it. The thing behind me got its prey that night, though it wasn't either of us. I saw her that Sunday afternoon, a woman hurrying past on a half-empty street who looked like she had been thrown out with the trash and not combed her hair since. She was stumbling a little, wearing office clothes, looking like she was late for getting fired. Sleep deprivation was absolutely etched into her face. far too wrinkled for the age that she looked like she should be. She didn't even look up or notice us as she stumbled past. She had probably learned by then, looking the way the tiredness had made her. People who heard her pleas for help would assume that she was crazy, a homeless beggar or an addict. I knew better, but I also knew better than to try to save her at this point. Right as she almost disappeared from view, she threw a glance over her shoulder. And just as she did, another woman rounded the corner, coming the same way that she had come, so they barely glimpsed each other before the first woman disappeared from view. Younger looking, prettier since she wasn't a wreck, better dressed. You would never notice that she looked exactly like the first woman. She walked with the most perfectly measured, patient step. And when I blinked again, she was gone. I check obituaries always in coroner's notes and crime reports. Officially, this woman died of some kind of mental illness or overdose. She went crazy, that's for certain. That's good. You're supposed to go crazy when you're sufficiently sleep deprived. It's one of the oldest defenses that we have. It prevents you from being completely sure that the thing behind you is what kills you. So don't glance behind you when you're hurrying home late at night. You already know this rule. You know it for a reason. I'm doing my best to keep you safe. It was risky to write this and risky to make you believe a little more, so you better have followed all the instructions. Sleep with one side of your bed against the wall. Tell your friends that they shouldn't be glancing over their shoulders, because it'll only make them more scared. And if you get up to use the bathroom and you're still feeling anxious from reading this, don't look in the mirror. Anyway, let me know which of the other rules that you might like me to explain. None of you asked to know about this rule. Everyone's all interested in what's under your bed and what's in your mirrors and why you need to run up the basement stairs. Well, sorry, first, there's one that I've realized I just need to get off my chest. So if there are any kids reading, don't step on the cracks. Writing this has been overwhelming. So many people asking for help with specific situations which sorry I can't give. You would have to speak to me in person. How exactly to communicate with guardians, it varies. There isn't really a system, just a patchwork. If there is nobody who knows how to keep the peace between humans and the others in a particular area, either humans will stop living there or somebody will end up doing the job. Whether they inherit it, learn it, or are appointed, or are even cursed with it. So if you need help, the methods vary. Some of us are, I'm not gonna lie to you, kinda crap. Those folks just sort of wander the streets waiting for the supernatural to bump into them so that they can sternly tell it off. There's others who have artifacts or helpers to detect signs of folks in need. And no, we do not all have a group chat. I've just met a few of us over the years. I'm afraid that I'm not the people-oriented type. I know where the bad guys are, but I just try to handle them in priority order, depending on how risky they are. I don't actually know if they're currently endangering anyone specific, unless I literally see something crash through your window. Even what I've got, I'm lucky to have. I'm only human, but I'm also a dancer, and my dancing partner is quite special. I know when people have broken rules, important rules, because the dark things will tell me. Last night, for instance, they whispered a name to me. Somebody who looked out of her window at precisely the wrong time and seen something that she shouldn't. Something that didn't like to be seen. They told me that her life was forfeit, and I agreed that I wouldn't try to save her, because letting them take the ones who offend them is why they leave the rest of us alone. I maybe could have found out where she lived, gone over, somehow persuaded her to salt every window and threshold, and gotten her to wear silver on both of her wrists and any fingers that she wanted to keep. But I have limits. I'm always so busy over the holiday period anyway, so I let her go. By now I'm used to letting people go. But the story that I want to tell you all is an old story, from when I was new to all of this. I was fanatical at first, you see. I thought that this guardian thing made me invincible. So when the wanted posters went up for a little girl named Bryony, the daughter of a friend who had helped me move, I didn't care if she was kidnapped by a human or personally picked out for slaughter by the Grey herself. I wanted her back. So I took the train to Sterling and I got off at Silvery. It doesn't look like a normal train station, so don't worry. You are unlikely to get off there by accident unless you're really not paying attention. And I mean it makes an effort. There's a gray concrete platform, a little red brick station house with a neat wooden rain shelters painted navy blue, a big sign in the same shade of blue that announces its name in the right sort of font. But it's deserted even in rush hour. The trees beyond the platform are too tall and thick to see what's beyond them, and there are cats everywhere. And well, it's too nice. Even in Scotland, public funding doesn't cover lampposts encrusted with emeralds, a wrought iron fence shaped like interlinked flowers, and a little fountain. Anyway, I got off and waited until the train disappeared beyond the horizon, and then I knelt by the fountain and thoroughly scrubbed my hands, my face, and removing my shoes and my feet. My exit from the station was barred by a smiling young man with the most fabulously shiny hair. "Why, hello there. It's a lovely day to meet somebody of such a fine sort. May I just check if you're sure you intend to enter here? If you're lost, I'd be more than happy to help you home." And it is a fantastic day to be greeted so kindly by such a proper young gentleman. I do so very much appreciate your offer to help, but please don't worry about me at all. I have an invitation here. The Fae nodded his head perfectly politely and stepped elegantly aside to let me pass. In the trees, the station was swallowed up behind me very quickly. It didn't take more than a few minutes' walk before I started seeing signs of other inhabitants. All of them were lovely. The perfect, graceful deer who bounded and leaped over the shining green ferns. The sweet little multicolored lanterns hung in the trees to mark the path. The flute music echoing from somewhere above me. The children who played in a clearing with their pet dogs and pet human, bright-eyed and golden-haired. I paused to watch as a sweet little Fae girl pet the human's hair, ripped his arm off cleanly and threw it clear across the clearing, calling, "Fetch!" I blinked for a moment as my mind processed that. But no, of course, that was lovely. They were only playing, so lovely. Like the lovely dancers twirling on a huge oak branch above me, and the lovely flowers growing on the path, and the lovely laughter of the children as they watched the human stumble in tears after his lambs. Everything in the Sealy court is polite, and lovely and sweet. The medal that I was looking for showed itself to me, after I had been wandering for perhaps half an hour. A crowd was gathered around a string quartet playing music in a key that I couldn't identify. I've never been able to identify it, no matter how many times I've been back, and I eventually figured it out. No matter what notes they play, what sharps or flats, what sevenths and fourths, what chords of 13 notes at once, everything simply sounds lovely. My dancing partner wasn't there, so I couldn't dance. I can never dance well without her, and to dance badly would risk being rude. I waited on the edge of the field and watched the most perfect butt that I had ever seen show off in the most wonderful ballet outfit. What? I'm a human, big deal. There was a rustling behind me in the leaves. I turned and instinctively knelt. Ah, it's the little sea-eyed one from Edinburgh, cooed a friendly voice. A finger lifted my chin and I was staring up at emerald skin, a perfect strong jaw, mossy hair longer than I could follow, kind eyes and velvet lips. Did you bring gifts? Mutely, I reached into my pocket and offered up a little silver necklace that I had picked up at the charity shop. It didn't matter that it was cheap, it was old. "Oh, lovely. Why don't you stand?" I hesitated. Sometimes this is a trap. Simply because I wouldn't want to give any insult. A laugh. "Rise, I give my permission. I know what you're here for, I don't think you want it though." And getting to my feet was easy. I sprung up, full of energy and joy. "I just need to know where she is. I don't think that she did anything wrong. I want her to be safe, and I'm willing to pay." The meadows seemed to get a little darker. I noticed a few people looking at me with strained smiles far too wide. "But of course," I hurriedly added, "only if that wouldn't be any trouble. I would hate to bother you with my petty human affairs." Those eyes studied me for a long time before the fae concluded, "You're very lucky she likes you." My smile and thanks came easy. I was lucky. The fairy led me into the woods underneath the trees. They enveloped me again within moments, and only moments later, I realized that I was being taken out of the Seelie court. The darkness flowed thick as oil between the flimsy branches, and the path was slick with rotting and fallen leaves. We walked into a tunnel formed by an arch of holly over our heads. No, brambles and blackberries. Wait, was that woven roots? Before long it was stone. I looked up overwhelmed and saw a vast opening in the sky, a sheer cliff of blinding brightness. Its neat edges stood in stark contrast to the crumbling mud walls. I was confronted by a slender, whip-like serpentine humanoid with coiling blades for limbs and staring yellow eyes. It was a creature that I now know to call an edgeling. It leaned deeply into me, almost touching my neck as it sniffed around my shoulder. "Ah, yes," it sniffed. I looked behind me. My fairy guide had melted back into the woods. The edgeling's long, thread-like tongue touched my shoulder and I startled backwards into the wall. "I just want Bryony," I told the edgeling. It snickered, spat, and turned away from me. "Are you sure?" I drew myself up to my full height, straightened my shoulders, and thought of the look of fire in my dancing partner's eyes. I remembered the minor demon that I had fought off the week before, thought of Bryony's mother's grief, and stiffened my spine. "I'm the guardian of Old Edinburgh, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of humans. You just can't take little children. Yes, I want her back, or my friends will hear about it." I snapped as I stared him down. I woke up back in my bed. That wasn't too strange. Sometimes leaving Silvery is a little strange. I've ended up in far worse places, so I figured it was a good sign. I had been listened to and respected, and so I went about my day. I was cleaning the kitchen when I got a knock at my door. I went to answer it, but there was nobody there, just you. A long, thin strip of meat curled up on my doorstep. Some kind of offering from some variety of murdery ghost cat. I had no real idea the limits of what I might be dealing with back then. I decided to leave it where it was for now until I figured out what to do, and I shut the door. No sooner had I shut it that there was another knock. Confused, I swung around and opened the door again. Nothing stared me in the face. I looked down and there was another long, thin strip of bloody meat. I ignored them when they knocked the third time. Just kept on cleaning my windows and doing my dishes. After I got started on cleaning my carpet, the knocking got insistent. I went to look again, this time just through my keyhole. The pile of meat had grown alarmingly, but nothing seemed dangerous, and so I opened the door. The curled up pieces had been straightened out. The puddle of blood was growing, but not alarmingly. This was not fresh meat, but something near the end looked like a foot almost, a shredded one. Sickened, I closed the door, put noise-canceling headphones on, and did a day's worth of spreadsheets on my laptop. I almost managed to forget about the knocking until I realized that I had no milk and I would need to stop out if I wanted a cup of tea. When I opened my door again though, I threw up. They had reassembled Bryony on my doorstep like a jigsaw, each slice the width of a human-height steak. The moist pieces slid apart from one another, so despite her skin being perfectly preserved, I could see in the gaps into her brain, her lungs, and the neatly cracked bones of her thighs. I realized rather swiftly that I should get this inside. The police don't necessarily need to know about the supernatural, and I didn't fancy explaining the corpse to them. I managed to get the stuff. I just refused to think of it as the actual corpse of some poor kid, onto a plastic sheet in my kitchen, though a few pieces slid out and unthreaded themselves from the mess, slapping softly onto my carpet. Why the heck did I have white carpet? Why was that a thought in my mind anyway? I felt awful. I felt responsible. My mind decided to start counting the specks in the glass of my kitchen window rather than feel those things. One more knock, almost so soft that I didn't hear it. I wasn't sure if it was real, but I went to the door. I just felt compelled to. Outside, it was a slice through a person, just a tattered diagonal slash. Half a pupil, half an eyelash, a centimeter of twitching lip, a few hairs that sprouted from the top and hung down to cover the exposed brain matter, a fascinating slice of chest with a tiny bit of heart tissue expanding in and out behind the skin, pumping blood that leaked down its skin to nowhere, a single toe. She was alive. She hopped towards me, but then it was too much to keep her balance. She seemed to find it easier to slither. I reached down my arm and she curled around it, lifting that single eye like a snake so that she could look into mine. "I'm so sorry," I told her. I broke down sobbing. "I'm so sorry, I have no idea. I'm just sorry, I'm so sorry." I think she caught sight of the pile in my kitchen because she stiffened on my arm. I quickly moved into my lounge. After sitting with her and simply weeping for what felt like forever, I realized that I should ask her, "Does it hurt?" The eyes stared into mine. A single teardrop fell. I learned my lesson, gentle reader. I knew that I had to let her go. And so I broke her neck. Judge me if you want to. You can even hate me for it if you want to. Just don't step on the cracks. I'm back. Yeah, I took a short break for a little while. To tell you the truth, I wasn't exactly writing for a huge audience here, you know. Being a guardian is lonely sometimes, and I was up at like 3 a.m. and I had the sudden urge to write some educational stuff for you. And suddenly I got hundreds of people being all, "How do I stop myself from getting murdered by horrible monsters?" And wow, it's a lot of pressure on top of my day job. The only reason that I wrote this all down in the first place was because I reckoned that nobody would read it at all. Yeah, and my name is Firin. Firinnish is an old joke amongst my friends that we're only similar to ourselves. Like I'm a Firin-shaped human, or a Firinnish, or a Firin-like. But the true Firin would be too powerful to behold. Personally, I think it's hilarious, but I understand if you want to punch me a little. So yeah, I took some time off. But I still want to help, and lots of you guys seem to want to know the story behind the mirrors. See, you've all got the primal instinct. It's a good instinct. Nobody ever told you that you mustn't look in a mirror when it's late at night, and you go to the bathroom in the dark. Nobody ever said, hey, that's dangerous because of spooky supernatural stuff. And you might not have believed them if they did. But you know, without needing to be told, you've evolved that fear. So you want to know why it's understandable, I guess. Let me tell you about Alicia Craig. Alicia's mother called me. When she opened the door, she opened it just a crack, so that I could barely see the nerves etched on her face. "Are you the guard?" she whispered pointlessly. I should add, since anything worth being scared of can hear your whispers just fine. Guardian, I corrected. I'm a guardian, yes. You lit a candle in your window, I heard about it, so I'm here. She opened the door a little more but was still blocking it enough that I couldn't come in. It's my daughter. We're all a little afraid of her, but you won't. She's not dangerous or... I'm not going to hurt her. I told her in my most reassuring leader promise kind of voice. I didn't actually use the word promise. She let me in. The apartment, like many in Edinburgh, was accessible from a winding unlit stone staircase. It was a relief to be in the warm golden light of the hallway. I closed the door behind me and spent a brief moment admiring the brightly colored creatures on the walls. They were brilliantly lifelike paintings, each depicting an animal. A fox, a hare, a stag poised to leap away into the shadows of a forest. The backgrounds were sketched in roughly blotchy watercolor, the loose hand of a truly confident artist, but the animals themselves were done with a lover's attention to detail. Harry does those. Alicia's mother had noticed me looking. Her brother, he's away at university. Doing zoology, I asked, admiring the layered feathers on the robin beside the door. Biology, but yeah, he likes the animals. Do you want a cup of tea or something? That'd be lovely. And then I'll need to meet Alicia. I was hurried through into a similarly decorated kitchen. The Craigs had a large collection of mismatched mugs, sort of like my own. I like those little moments where you see someone else living just like you and it reminds you that you're still human, you know. I need those sometimes. My tea came in an oversized red mug with curved sides, perfect for warming both of my hands. It had dots and a green leafy pattern at the rim, like it was pretending to be a giant strawberry. I was so caught up admiring it that I almost didn't see Alicia. Can I have a cup of tea? She asked plaintively. Her mother, who had just sat down with her own mug of tea, sighed and got back up. While Alicia's mother made tea, I studied the girl. She seemed normal enough. Bright eyes, brown hair, freckles, a creased school uniform. She flopped down in one of the kitchen chairs and then returned my stare. I don't know what she was looking at. I'm pretty sure that I appeared normal enough. I don't go around wearing cloaks or anything stupid, not unless I'm going LARPing. I still really haven't figured out my style since I switched genders and all, but at the time I was going through a phase of wearing long dark coats and jumper vests because I thought that it made me look gentlemanly. In hindsight, it made me look like a butch secondary school English teacher, but you know, we live and we learn. Those bright eyes studied me, and after a little while I began to get comfortable under their gaze. Is this the guard you talked about, Mom? The one that can help me with my nightmares? Guardian, I corrected wearily. I could already tell you that it was going to get really tired of that. Yes, Alicia's mother glanced at me. You can fix that, right? I don't know, I've never had a guard or a guardian before. I don't know you all even existed, and a month ago I wouldn't have believed it. How did you hear about me? I inquired, always curious to know where I'm getting my business from. Librarian, Alicia replied before her mother could answer. I asked my librarian. Mom didn't want to call you at first, but I set a candle in the window at a high risk-reward ratio because it wouldn't really hurt us if you didn't come by. And if you did, then it would prove something supernatural was happening. I raised an eyebrow. Alicia didn't look old enough to be saying things like risk-reward ratio. I see you well, Alicia. Can I ask you a few questions? Alicia nodded. First of all, can you tell me what's been happening? I get really mad sometimes, Alicia told me matter-of-factly. She seemed quite calm. Like really mad, it doesn't feel good. And when I feel really mad, sometimes people get sick. Mom had food poisoning for a week after she made me eat some broccoli. I didn't mean to do anything. I nodded and took that in. That description could mean any number of things. Okay, Alicia, thank you for telling me. Can I ask you something else? She nodded. The bright eyes were still studying me carefully. The world has lots of dangerous things in it, but usually humans have lots of natural defenses too. Like how the kitchen has a dangerous fire in it that your mom uses to cook, but you wouldn't really touch the fire because it'd be hot and painful, so you would pull your hand away. That instinct keeps you safe. You know what I mean? Alicia nodded. I decided to trust that she understood. Kids are usually smarter than you think they are. Our instincts keep us safe from the supernatural too. Like how you imagine that thing running alongside your car, and you play that game where you don't step on any cracks, and you feel safer if your bed is against the wall. And did you do anything against those rules recently? Alicia hesitated and then crossed her arms. I hurriedly added, "You're not in trouble if you did. Sometimes people get to feeling brave and experimental, and they want to see what happens. I just need to know so that I can fix it." She paused, fidgeted, and then relented. "I looked in the bathroom mirror when it was really dark. It was scary, and I wanted to understand why it was scary. I thought that it was brave." Brave is such a stupid way of saying stupid. It's a dumb word. "Can I take a look at the mirror?" I asked. Alicia's mom got up in response and guided me down the hallway to the bathroom. "It's not just the anger," she told me in a whisper as soon as we had left the room. "She changes a bit. She doesn't remember doing it." I looked down at the phone that I was offered and flipped through a few pictures. Alicia's face had twisted with something dark and awful, a grin far too wide and eyes a little too large, screaming at something behind the camera. A cat torn to pieces, a post-it note left on the fridge reading, "It's too late." The mirror in the bathroom was just a mirror. I turned the lights on and then smiled at it experimentally. My own face smiled back with my own sea green eyes and poorly taken care of teeth. There was a hint of flame around my hair, a sign of my dancing partner, but of course Alicia's mother couldn't see that. She hovered behind me nervously. I returned to the kitchen table, projecting calm as strongly as I could. Nobody needed to know that seeing the cat bothered me. "So, what's up? Can you help her?" Of course, I settled myself back down and finished my tea. Mirrors are important to our souls. They're not doors to an alternate dimension or whatever else you've heard, at least not unless it's a rather special mirror. But the act of recognizing yourself, of thinking that, "Ah yes, that's me. I'm a being who thinks," that's what creates and reinforces the self. Mirrors can rather directly facilitate that process. So do other things that help us recognize ourselves. Reading back through your old diaries, for instance, or even doing those stupid "which Disney princess are you" quizzes online, if you get a vaguely accurate answer. That doesn't help Alicia. Alicia's mother seemed significantly more anxious and impatient than Alicia herself. I'm getting to that. There are beings that would like to slip in always, possession, but usually humans are quite hard to possess, because we know who we are and what we want, and it's hard for something to take over without some kind of foothold. And distorted reflections can give them that foothold. You think you recognize yourself, you accept the reflection as yourself, but it isn't you. Hiding in the shadowy parts, there is something that you're not looking at, and it's not something that you want to invite into yourself. Clean mirrors in well-lit rooms are the safest. So I need to move the mirror. Well, yes, and I rummaged around in the bag that I brought for a moment. Possession's an easy fix since it's frowned upon by few laws and human morality, so it's much easier to get help without offending anyone. You've caught it at an early enough stage that some fairly minor positive spirits ought to be able to handle things. I'll just give you some stuff that attracts the helpful kind of beings and we'll let them handle it. A lavender circle around Alicia's bed. Here's a silver ring. Here's a token to leave on an open windowsill. And do you have a pen? Here's the lyrics for a summoning song. A tune doesn't matter. I handed over the things and packed up my bag and drank another cup of tea and made small talk for 5 minutes. I remember feeling pretty good about it all. I had done my job as a guardian and it hadn't been hard. They had been reasonably friendly and I got 2 cups of tea out of the bargain. I went and handled other things, spreadsheets at work, a date. Now with George, y'all need to stop shipping us, it's weird. And a few chalk lines in back alleys that needed a quick refresh. I came back 2 days later just to check in and Alicia answered the door. I had just come from work and it was winter in Edinburgh, so it was dark and my fingers were freezing. Hey Alicia, I greeted her brightly. Feeling much better? Much. Can I speak to your mother? Alicia let me in without a word. I walked in and I looked around and then poked my head in the kitchen. No sign of Alicia's mother. Hey, where is she? I called out to Alicia. There was an audible click as Alicia shut the door behind me. She's in her room, the girl told me. I walked along the hallway to the door that Alicia indicated, and then hesitated and took a step left in the bathroom instead. There it was in the mirror, a tiny crack right in the corner. How could I not have noticed it before? And running along a few of the corner lines of the bath and in the tiny groove at the edge of the mirror, mold, the black kind that appears when you don't clean the bathroom enough. That was very, very bad. I had a sinking feeling that something awful might have happened to the positive spirits that the Craigs had summoned. I emerged back into the hallway. The child at the other end of the hallway, framed in the light of the kitchen, wasn't Alicia. In the shadows, I could see where her face had twisted, where her grin wasn't a child's grin, where her skin cracked and fragmented into shadows. The thing took one step forward and I bolted into Alicia's mother's room and slammed the door behind me. Alicia's mother wasn't herself either. She had been rearranged. Her nerves were laid out in lines and rows across the walls, her blood vessels a tangle on the bed, her intestines strung out across the desk. Something had been curious about how humans were put together, I supposed. Mold had overtaken the room. Black was splashed all over the folded skin, the urine-soaked bed linen, the carpet and the desk. Some sort of rot had set into the intestines, with the half-digested contents showing through the rotted-away sections. The heart was pulsing slowly around the 2 colored kids' pencils that impaled it on the desk. Scribbles and doodles covered the walls next to the nerves strung up there. A tiny sheep with a pink balloon was depicted in crayon and mold next to the brown-black dried splatter that I suspected must have once been a kidney. I took one step forward and a lung squelched beneath my foot, and the entire room shuddered and made the most awful noise that I had ever heard. And I had the awful, awful realization that Alicia's mother might still be alive. The doorknob behind me turned. I didn't hesitate. I just sprinted. I made it to the window and I flung myself out and not even caring about what might happen when I hit the ground. I'm not proud of abandoning that woman there and I never even learned her name, but I am proud that I'm alive. I broke an ankle, but George patched me up later. It's useful having a friend who's a nurse. I don't know what Alicia is now. Some things are above my pay grade. I'm a guardian, I keep the peace, but stuff that possesses you, it wasn't a part of the peace in the first place. I don't have to negotiate. I don't have to arrange for humans to keep out of other people's space in exchange for other beings to not kill us. The Fae want that stuff exterminated just as much as we do. I let that kind of thing be handled by, well, people that can afford to even contemplate being in that room when that door opened. I still have nightmares about it. Anyway, that's why you don't look in mirrors when it's dark. Please, for the love of all the gods, that there's a reason why that terrifies you. Listen to that instinct. Don't make me break any more ankles, please. If this post gets even one of you to avoid that kind of fate, it's worth me being awake at 8 a.m. to post this. Hit me up in the comments if you want any more explanations. Oh, and I mostly tweet about my day job in gaming. I have a life outside of being a guardian, but feel free to follow me on Twitter. You already know the rules. Please follow them.